study session. Got a motion and a second to return to study session. All in favor say aye. Aye. That's what we'll do. What is the council's pleasure for item number 2? Councilmember Kozaczek.
This is the part of the RTA Broadway widening project. I'm sorry that we're even having the conversation because I didn't think Broadway needed to be widened based on traffic counts, but it is, and so I'm going to move that we approve the mutually agreed upon mediated settlement at the amount of $615,000, $250.
Second.
Got a motion and a second on that. Any further discussion on that item?
And I
Mr.
note
Lincoln.
that the settlement would include any interest that's associated with that.
Okay. If there's no other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That motion passes. What's the council's pleasure for item 10? I think this is also within your ward.
It is, and I move that we approve the settlement at $175,000.
Got a motion and a second on that item. Any other discussion there? If not, all in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? That also passes. Let's move on to item 3, which is the primary jobs incentive for modular mining systems, scheduled for 15 minutes. Modular Mining Systems has applied for a primary jobs incentive. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as outlined in your materials, we are recommending the primary jobs incentive for modular mining systems. Be happy to answer questions. I believe it's very straightforward. The economic analysis has been complete, and I think we're good to go at this point.
Councilmember Fimbers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Modular mining is one of the parts of the renaissance of the Ward 5 and the South Side. They have 300 employees at the headquarters here and want to expand further here in Ward 5 and Tucson with 35 employees and higher paying jobs. These 35 jobs would have an average wage of $81,000 per year plus bonuses and benefits. The new jobs include application engineers, software engineers, managers, project engineers, mining engineers, electrical engineers, and administrative staff, among others. Modular Mining Systems previously entered into a primary jobs incentive program development agreement approval on December 6th under resolution number 22684 and have already successfully completed the job creation requirements under that agreement. So I move the city manager direct staff to return with a development agreement formalizing the incentive points.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this matter? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, that's done.
I also want to thank Mike and Juan Padres for their work on this.
All right, thank you. Yeah. All right, let's move on to item 4, which is the economic analysis for the Main Gate Partners, LLC, also scheduled for 15 minutes. Time has been set aside for discussion of the economic analysis for Main Gate Partners. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the analysis has been completed. Staff does recommend that you direct us to come back to you with the development agreements. That's the next step. I think the information contained in the memorandum is sufficiently clear, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any councilperson? Councilman Kozaczek?
This is an $82 million project that has nearly doubled the square footage from what we originally approved. They've added 244 apartments and over 8,000 square feet of public plaza space that's going to be activated for public uses. The current project would not have been built in this scale with our previous incentive. The direct benefits are over $6 million at a cost of about $3.5 million. And so I would move that we approve the 10-year 45% city sales tax plus the transient occupancy tax capped at $350,000.
Second.
Got a motion and a second on that matter. Any discussion on this? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that matter passes. Let's see if we can pick up the discussion by moving to item 5. Item 5 is the shared mobility devices, scheduled for 30 minutes. Time has been set aside for discussion of a limited time pilot program for shared mobility devices. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I'll invite Diana and Andy to come up. This is a pilot program that we are recommending the council consider. I think there's a lot of flexibility. There's been a lot of research done. I know there's been a lot of conversation with your offices as well as with staff. So with that, Diana, did you want to make a couple of brief opening remarks? Okay, so I'll turn it over to Diana Alarcon, our TDOT director.
I've never done this one.
There.
Sorry, excuse me. I'm going to learn all the technology first. Good afternoon. I'm actually going to turn it over to Andy, and he's going to do a quick overview for you of the proposal that we're putting before you. So, Andy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I appreciate having you
appreciate you having us here today to discuss the potential for an electric scooter share pilot program here in Tucson. As you all know, electric scooters are a very new micro-mobility transportation option that has been growing in U.S. cities over the past year or so. Preliminary results indicate that scooters do have potential benefits in terms of offering low-cost mobility options for Tucsonans, supporting local businesses, and reducing car trips. That said, they also come with potential concerns of user safety and clutter in the right-of-way due to their dockless operational model. So, on your direction from the study session in September 5th, staff members from the Shared Mobility Working Group have conducted extensive research on the best practices for operating and regulating shared scooter programs. And we've met with several internal and external stakeholders to prepare the drafts that you have before you today. The specifics included in these drafts were developed from the recently published guidelines for regulating scooter operations by the National Association of City Transportation Officials, as well as the International Municipal Lawyers Association. We also did an extensive review of regulations in other cities, including Seattle, San Francisco, Santa Monica, Tempe, Austin, and several other cities. So in preparing these regulations, we worked closely with staff from several city departments to iron out the details of the permitting process, the program oversight, the data sharing components, and the enforcement aspects of the program. We also met with community stakeholders likely to be impacted by a scooter share program, including the University of Arizona, Pima Community College, the Marshall Foundation, Fourth Avenue Merchants Association, Downtown Tucson Partnership, Mercado District, and Tugo Bike Share. We partnered with researchers at the University of Arizona Transportation Research Institute to develop a program evaluation during the pilot phase so that we can understand what impact a scooter share system in Tucson might have on the mobility of our citizens, the safety of our roadways, our transit operations, and also our local businesses. So just as a reminder, the proposal before you today is for a limited time, 6-month pilot, during which time the city would retain right to terminate or make adjustments at any time. And while we've done our best to craft regulations that are responsive to our staff and constituent needs and draw from lessons learned in other cities, we anticipate that adjustments may be necessary during a pilot. And so we know that the best outcomes come from operations that have a close relationship with the vendors and are able to make those adjustments. So I know there are representatives from 2 scooter companies, Bird and Lime, here today. If you care to hear from them, they're available. And with that, I'll just leave it up for discussion.
Okay, anybody want, I can open the discussion. Let me give you my first thoughts. I don't think they're going to be a whole lot different than probably cumulative. I'll go to Councilman Cunningham after that. I have some concern about going on a first-come, first-served basis. If we're going to do something like an RFP, we should do it. I'm not sure, and I'm willing to hear why, Andy. So, I mean, again, these are all discussion points. Why we would go to 4, you know, because as opposed to the 2 best that you would find. I do want to hear about enforcement at some point. I think that's a real concern. I mean, I've, you know, these things are in all the cities now. We're a late adopter, as it were. And you can go to some cities and they're really well regulated, and you can go to other cities and they can be a mess. So I'm not sure what the difference is. I saw where the Downtown Tucson Partnership gave us a sort of a model for an RFP process, and I might suggest you take a hard look at that. I know that there are going to be some places, even in where we would maybe think it would be okay to have these things, that they just don't want them, and maybe with good reason. Fourth Avenue it comes to mind first and foremost, but I'm not sure about all of downtown, so I'd like to hear more about geofencing. I will tell you my strongest, and again, you talked me out of it, 2,000 scooters seems like way too much for a pilot program. I mean, that's a big number, unless you're spreading them all over Pima County. And then I know we had this conversation, but you know, the community made a substantial private investment in the Tugo bike share, and I know they're different, but I sure would like some confidence from Tugo, and then I didn't see that in the materials, that they were good with this. So I'm for going forward in some way, but that's a number of questions I have. Councilmember Cunningham?
There's a lot of different facets to a program like this. I actually visited and traveled extensively last year to San Diego, Southern California, Washington, D.C., and New York City. And I'm pretty confident that I'm the only council member with both a Lime account and a Bird account. The whole process actually intrigued me. The whole process intrigued me. While I was in San Diego was in the middle of their city council having an extensive discussion about this, and they were going to ban them on the sidewalk near the beach, near Mission Beach, because no one had been injured yet, but they were very concerned about the possibilities. A few things I'll talk about. Number one, with the way our city's laid out, with the transit system we have, the birds, the limes, and independent operators of these type of companies can actually end up being an asset if they're community partners. I actually truly believe that. I like that we have a permitting fee up front. I like that we have a system in that we're going to get a little bit of, let's say that every single, say all 2,000 are deployed, and every single one is used, say, 10 times. I think our revenue share per day is something like $40,000 a day. Is that what you guys estimated?
It's all about the numbers right there, but it's $1 per vehicle per day.
So, okay, so it's $2,000 a day per vehicle, not per ride. Sorry, my fault. I also like the idea that they shared some indemnification, and they're covering our liability when people are injured. I want to make that very airtight. In other words, I don't want to be in a situation where we have a bird customer runs over someone on one of our sidewalks and the city is sued. I don't think that's appropriate for us, and that's got to be part of this process. Unfortunately, that's probably the biggest thing, is that if you've got somebody who's too heavy and they're rolling 15 miles an hour on a bird scooter and they hit a pedestrian, some significant injuries can happen. So that's really important that we have that. They do have some mechanisms within their own system so that only 15-year-olds can rent them. They have mechanisms where you have to have a major credit card, you have to have a phone. So they have some things, but I absolutely do believe that part. The other thing that I was told when we were briefed about this was the reason we set it at 2,000 and the reason we set it with 4 operators was because, one, this is a free market, and the operators are going to come in and do it. If we make our fee just too high, Lime and Bird will basically get to corner the market and get to compete only with each other and basically set the prices the way they want, which I'm not sure I'm good with that. I'd like if we have an upstart operator, and we're a local Tucson artisan town, and there's going to be somebody who's going to make artsy scooters for people to ride on, and so we need to be able to have that opening for people like that can't afford that 16. That's why that permit fee is at $1,600, so it's a modest amount, and then we've got the $1 per scooter per ride. So I like all those things. I think this only works for these companies if at some point the loop opens up as well, or at least partially opens up as well. I think this only works for these companies if the U of A allows access for them. Otherwise, they'll just kind of be a thing that only happen in Tucson and downtown, and they're not actually used. The coupling with our transit system creates incredible possibilities, and it's a pretty intriguing thing when you see it in action. That's kind of where I'm at, but the main thing I want to stress is I want to ensure that we're going to have full cost recovery with whatever issues we have with these, and that we are indemnified and covered if there's a problem. I think people can be our partners on this, but as everyone knows, one of the things that we built the streetcar specifically because downtown was too close to drive and too far to walk from the University of Arizona. Well, now we have a lot of different places in Tucson where it's too close to drive and too far to walk. And this Bird scooter creates a viable option for us. I'd love to have some discussions with them once we have this pilot going a little bit and seeing kind of getting a flavor, getting a feel for how they are impacting or even helping our community. We can take a look at, hey, you can do a scooter app and you can get a bus ride if you're going across town from stop to stop. So I think there's some possibilities here. there's not a lot that's going to stop this. I don't want to be the only city in the nation that doesn't have this. I also think it's a revenue opportunity. So I'd urge us to push forward and continue the conversation. This is a very detailed document. I love that. I think it's like, I want to say there was 124 different recitals in here when I counted them. So I'm very happy with the direction we are. I want to take those comments I have today in mind. And other than that, I really want to, I forgot to say at the beginning, Diana, welcome. It's your first meeting, isn't it? Welcome to the city of Tucson. We're glad to have you. And the other thing I wanted to say was, Andy, you've done a really good job on this. I mean, you really were detailed. And I remember when we met about 6 months ago, because I came back from vacation, I was like, man, I just went to San Diego and I was on the bird scooter and it was kind of crazy. And so, I warned you that they were going to come. And it was nice that Bird and Lime did not just show up in our town and dump nests out like they did in other cities, and they engaged us from the beginning. So I think everybody here is working in good faith, and I think ultimately we're going to have a good agreement. So those are my comments this afternoon, and again, I'd just like to commend the Department of Transportation for being so proactive in this.
Councilman Romero, Durham, and then Kozaczyk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate it. I think I'm in between the mayor and Councilmember Cunningham. I too agree that it's a really good micro form of transportation, that it could connect bus riders and Sunlink riders to their next step. But I think that it's a good idea, first and foremost, that we're doing a pilot. I too feel as though 4 operators during a pilot program is a bit much. Even though I do agree with Councilmember Cunningham that it should be an open market, it should be fair, and for smaller startups, we need to make sure that we have that availability. I have questions too about the RFP process. If we are going to do an RFP process, I'm not too sure if first come, first serve is how we should go about it. And then the infrastructure. Since they're dockless scooters, how is it going to affect what the city of Tucson will be responsible for? If they become nuisances on the sidewalks, then we need to make sure that we're looking at the expenses that will add to the Department of Transportation or to Parks and Rec or to streets. We need to take a look at that. And then the infrastructure in terms of riding it. Will they be riding in our sidewalk? Will they be riding on the bike lanes? Is it safe for the public to be able to use this scooter without hurting themselves or others that are pedestrians and they pass along in their bikes? So I guess those are my comments. I just want to also touch on the fees that we're charging. There are other models out there, and I believe Vice Mayor Fimbres had some questions about what are the programs, what are the charges, what are the annual permits. I had been directed to look at the San Francisco as a model because they do charge more and they do have less companies operating in their city, and they have much more control of what happens. And then if you can explain a little bit more, just like the mayor, what about geofencing? What about 4th Avenue, which is a connector to our urban core, and the University of Arizona as well?
Okay. I don't know that we're being entirely fair with you because we're asking a lot of questions and not letting you answer, but let's kind of go through it and we'll come back. Okay, Councilman Durham.
I think that San Diego used geofencing at Mission Beach to enforce slower speeds there. Could you discuss that? The current proposal says that operators are encouraged to deploy the electric scooters near transit stops, but there's no actual incentive. And I think that maybe one good thing about a pilot program is we can, in the first 6 months, study whether the question, whether they need, whether a sufficient number are deployed near transit stops, or they need an additional incentive to deploy them there. Because I think that I very much like the fact that it addresses the first mile, last mile problem of public transit. So I guess I think that the best approach is to during the first 6 months to look at that, whether we need more incentive or not. Third, the Downtown Tucson Partnership is concerned that they may have some costs of enforcement under the program, or at least cleanup or rearranging scooters that are parked inappropriately. I suppose that one approach we could do is approach this as a pilot project, and if Downtown Tucson Partnership complains that any costs are theirs, that they incur any costs in connection with the pilot program, that we could consider making changes to compensate them, or make other arrangements to eliminate their cost. That's all I have for now.
Councilor Sachik.
Yeah, that was one of the DTP's concerns among several. So to respond to a couple of things that have been said already, and also to add on to some more, this whole conversation began not because Bird and Lime announced that they wanted to be good partners with us. It was because we found out that they were hiring and were concerned that they were going to dump 1,000 each of these scooters in our city, and we wanted to be proactive, and so we sent the message out that they're illegal here. That was the starting point. It wasn't let's be good corporate partners with each other and start working towards an agreement. It's nice that they're here now, but the relationship didn't begin with kumbaya. In San Francisco, responding to the free market comment, in San Francisco they do have higher fees, and neither Bird nor Lime won the bid. There were companies called Scoot and Skip, and so it's not as though they have a corner on this market. And in fact, San Francisco had almost 10, I'm just scanning their selection sheets, almost 10 companies bidding on it and who were considered. So increasing the fees is not going to give them a corner on the market. It's going to simply satisfy some of our concerns about revenue, exposure, and all of that. We're not talking about managing a scooter. We're talking about managing 2,000 scooters, where they go and where they're dumped. The question about where the operators deploy them is half of the equation. The other half of the equation is where the ride ends. That's where the scooter is going to be dumped and left. That's one of the concerns that people in the Downtown Tucson Partnership have, and along 4th Avenue, along Main Gate. They are illegal on campus. They're waiting to see how our beta test works out before they move forward with it. And I would say that if there's anywhere in the city, on the streetcar line, where they might be appropriate, it's on the mall, where there are wide open areas for pedestrians and bikes to cohabitate. Not on 4th Avenue, where they're competing with the streetcar and pedestrians and bicycles, where they have narrow sidewalks, where as long as you dump the thing and you leave 48 inches, you're good to go according to the terms of our pilot. Nor downtown, the same kind of thing, where you're already competing with planters, and we just put grant money into beautification of downtown, that the the Merchants Association and the facade program just put a lot of money into the downtown beautification. To see these things now, 1,000 of them downtown laying on the sidewalks, as long as you leave 4 feet clearance, you're good to go. I don't accept that as a good way to present our city. So let's be real. These things are likely not going to be, in the terms of the RFP, they're going to identify areas where they find these things to be appropriate. It's not going to be out in Rita Ranch. It's not going to be on Stone Avenue in the Miracle Mile Strip. It's going to be along the streetcar route. They might be appropriate out by the Mercado. That's Regina's stuff, and you're not getting that. We're getting more wide open sidewalks and not as much traffic. They're not, according to the terms of the pilot, allowed on sidewalks to ride. By the way, if they did, it's a citable offense, but then we have another enforcement problem. We already don't have the enforcement agents in the city to go out and even take care of shopping carts that are laying all over the place. Now we're going to have to keep an eye on this. I understand that it's not TPD who's supposed to go out. It means, okay, we see your scooter laying in front of Caruso's on 4th Avenue, make a phone call, you got 2 hours to go clean it up. It's still going to be labor intensive, and if they don't do it, then Caruso's is going to have to deal with scooters laying in front of their business, and they have concerns about that. I have concerns about that. With respect to the fees, I don't think we're asking for enough. San Francisco asks for a $25,000 annual permit. We're asking for $15,000. San Francisco asks for a $10,000 endowment to cover their costs. We're asking for $1,672 as a permit review. San Francisco is asking for a $5,000 application fee, and we're getting $1 a scooter per day. So our project is projected to generate a little over $400,000 if we get all 2,000 scooters. Almost half of that is going to be taken up with IT and enforcement. So this is not going to be, some great windfall for us. We're allowing 2,000. San Francisco is allowing 1,250. Again, 4 vendors versus 2. The document that we were reviewing looked to me to be a cut and paste from some other place, because it kept talking about e-bikes as well, and we're not talking about that here today. Our safety section is a series of city is not responsible for a bunch of CYAs with some loose language about the vendors prioritizing education and recommending a helmet. If you look at these, the vendors who were selected in San Francisco, they've agreed to things such as mandatory training that they'd provide, mandatory instructional videos. They provide helmets with the rentals, free in-person training, ambassadors out along the corridor to instruct riders who are operating inappropriately with respect to safe behavior. And ours says qualified applicants will be selected on a first-come, first-served basis. That's a problem. We're saying if you lick the stamp first and you check the right boxes in terms of indemnification, then you win. Parking, with some exceptions, we're asking that our landscaped and furniture zone be the allowable place for these things to be dropped. And for me, that means we're asking for a mess in an already congested area of the city. Main gate, very heavily trafficked pedestrian bicycle zone with the streetcar, with back-in parking. The 4th Avenue, same thing, the same areas of conflict, the downtown core. I can't see these things riding in the street with traffic, with the streetcar, with pedestrians, with bikes, 15 miles an hour in those congested areas and being anything but a huge red flag and an accident waiting to happen. I spoke about the selection criteria. I know I had these printed out already, but the DTP included you can pass those down to the rest of everyone else. This is the matrix that the San Francisco used in their RFP. And it talks about safety, disabled access, equitability, community outreach, labor sustainability, experience qualifications. Before we approve any kind of pilot, we need to make sure that we're going through an extensive and and quality-based selection process, so we're not just saying, Bird and Lime, you licked the stamp first, you were here first, and so therefore you win. On the first mile, last mile deal, we have a frequent transit network that we worked hard to establish. It's based on ridership. If we want to expand that frequent transit network and we're concerned about that whole first mile, last mile dynamic, then put it out somewhat, put these things outside of our FTN, where we're trying to expand the frequent transit network. Paul, if you want them down on Stone Avenue, Miracle Mile, that'd be a great place to do our beta test. I would like to see a specific parking plan, as opposed to a loose discussion about, well, maybe we'll take parking spaces. Have that conversation about taking parking spaces with some of the merchants along 4th Avenue, Main Gate, or the downtown core, and you'll probably see not a small mushroom cloud forming above those areas. It's not, you know, they're asking for more parking, not to have us restrict them. And every time we do a capital project downtown, and when we put the streetcar in, all of those areas lost parking, lost on-street parking. Those are some of my concerns. I'm not going to support a pilot plan that has this many holes in it.
Councilor Fimbres?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How does this proposal not conflict with the present TUGO agreement? Andy?
Thank you, Council Member Fimbres. The contract with Shift Transit to operate the TUGO bike share system exclusively refers to competing bike share operations and doesn't reference scooters whatsoever. So, and that actually will get to Councilmember Kozachik's question as well about why dockless bicycle language is included in the permit requirements, is because we wanted an overarching document that addresses all mobility types, but because of our contract with Shift Transit to operate TUGO, we're not considering dockless bike share systems at this time.
Okay, and then on what legal standing could the city make changes to any aspect of this proposed pilot program during the time the pilot program has been ongoing?
I'll take a stab at it. There might be a attorney question, or Roy, but you know, the pilot regulations do provide us the authority to make changes at any time.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, as a pilot program, it's structured such that the individual permits can be terminated or adjusted during the pilot period, so anytime during the 6-month period.
Okay, so we can make adjustments. And then, would the city ordinance require a helmet for use for people 18 and under apply here, and would that be implemented? I understand we don't have a helmet law,
right?
But is there something here? Because I keep looking at it, I keep hearing on the news how injuries keep rising in fatalities, and we've seen a rash with pedestrians and bicyclists and motorcyclists. What, you know, how are the numbers looking in these places that have these pilot programs?
Yeah, very good question. The pilot right now calls for an age limit of 18 years or older, so our helmet law requires helmets for people riding bicycles under the age of 18.
Yeah.
Right. So it wouldn't require helmet use at this time.
But I know that San Francisco requires a helmet, or...
Yeah.
Okay, so can you explain a little bit more about enforcement component? I know TPD doesn't have the manpower, but what are we looking at? Some of these things are also safety factors. Explain the incident when you came to my house about the little lady that was walking her dog in her mechanized wheelchair, and somebody shouldn't be on the sidewalk, ran into her because he was texting on his phone and riding his bike, and didn't even pay attention to her, and injured her pretty badly, and ran over her dog. So how do we avoid some of these things?
Yeah. I'll say when it comes to enforcement, I think there's two main areas. There's rider and user behavior, and then there's parking. And on the parking side, as Councilmember Kozachik mentioned, we have the policy states that we require the operators to move their devices within 2 hours of notice, ideally, so it's not putting more burden on our enforcement operations. In terms of riding, be enforced in the same way that bicycle riders or anyone else riding on the sidewalk would be enforced. It would be a ticketable offense on the sidewalk. To try and get ahead of that and not be as reactive, we do require that they provide safety materials to users in the app before you unlock a scooter, and we require the ability to require operators to put out our own safety materials if we wanted to do so as well. So users have to see that before they ride and before they end a trip.
Okay, and explain the indemnification process further in terms of preventing potential city liability and preserving citizen safety, both rider and other users of the right-of-way.
So, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, the indemnification is absolutely a must for any type of program like this. And you'll see in the materials that any permittee would be required to indemnify the city. But it doesn't end there, because indemnification typically is only as valuable as the insurance that backs it up. And so as part of the pilot program, or any program going forward, if we do have one beyond the pilot program, would require not just indemnification, which is where the party agrees to hold the city harmless against lawsuits that might arise from the activities, but there has to be minimum insurance that they have to maintain that names the city as additional insured party at levels that we approve. And in this instance, we're requiring at a minimum $3 million per incident coverage.
How will we track? We're given a 6-month pilot program. Can you explain what you're going to be looking at for the 6 months and reporting back to us what you're going to be tracking for this process? Andy?
Sure. And like I mentioned in the opening statements, we're working with U of A to develop a full evaluation at this time. It's in draft form, but I think the areas that we're primarily concerned about first and foremost are safety. So we're reaching out to hospitals in the city to try and TPD to make sure that if there is ever crashes or incidents that we are aware of those. We require the operators to let us know if they become aware of any crashes that happen on the scooters, so we can evaluate what frequency and what severity are there incidents in Tucson. We obviously don't want to introduce something that would be unsafe. Also public perception and then ridership. And so we require that the operators distribute surveys of whatever survey we like to their users, so we understand how people are using them, how they would have taken that trip had they not been on a scooter, so we better understand, are these really replacing driving trips? Are they primarily replacing walking trips or transit trips, or how is it being used in Tucson? Yeah, so safety, rider behavior, and then public perception. So we fully intend to field a survey to not only scooter users, but to the general public on their perceptions of the program, so we can report back in 6 months on, what does the community think about this, how safe is it, and how are people using it?
Thank you, Andy and Roy, for all the work that you put into this pilot. Thank you.
Councilman Durham, did you want to?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, we were expecting to wait and then answer the questions because you all had questions. If you'd like, we can start to go back and answer some of the questions that you all have asked.
I think I'm getting a pretty good sense what council's looking for. I'm happy to hear a little more from council, and then
so we're available. Obviously, we can go over it either now or we can follow up with you after.
Okay, Councilman Durham.
Well, one point I forgot when I talked. I think it makes sense to have some kind of a way of ranking the proposals to see how many of them meet our minimum requirements. Our wish list, maybe. So I would like to see some device for ranking the proposals. I agree with Councilmember Kozachek. It doesn't make sense to, on an entirely first come, first served basis. I'm done.
Councilman Romero, and then Councilman Cunningham.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to see if there's a possibility of discussing the idea of going back. I know there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of gaps going back and continuing to work on this pilot proposal. I know that you've worked a lot and we appreciate it, and I think this is a creative way to continue adding to our transit network. But I'd like to be able to create a map, a transit map, that would fill in the holes that we're all concerned about, right? So can we make sure that this program is a piece of the transit puzzle, that it will be part of our frequent transit network, that it will connect that last mile that we're all concerned about, and that it has an RFP process that looks at safety, access, community outreach, what labor the city of Tucson has to put into this effort, the cost of that potential labor, and that we get the input of additional stakeholders in this. So I, as well as Councilmember Kozachik, have mentioned the San Francisco model. I'd like to look at something that is much more similar to the San Francisco model, only because it recovers much more and it's much more comprehensive in its approach. So I don't know if Mr. Mayor, you would want a motion to go back to continue working on this proposal and take a look at the San Francisco model, try and model it much more after that, and include an RFP process. Of course, something that will also look at the possibility of just having 2 versus 4 companies come into the city of Tucson. So if you like.
I've kind of written down everybody's thoughts and checked when people have concurred with them. So we'll go through them in a second. I think Councilman Cunningham, did you have anything more on this?
Just one last few more things. One is I think where we're headed is probably some type of the pilot model that's been introduced and putting a lot of what's in the San Francisco model into it. I think that's probably where we're headed. I wasn't planning on adopting this thing today, so those were some of the comments. I mean, I know it can wait. There's always stuff to be tightened up on this type of stuff. The second one is I think that what's been lost in this discussion is that we really do need a pilot program. We just don't know enough. I mean, even whatever we put out, we need to be able to change it. We don't know exactly where the hot spots are going to be. You never do. I mean, sometimes it's the most unlikely area. So, conventional wisdom would be the WOW Center or something, but all of a sudden it's at the casino. I mean, who knows? All right. The other thing I'd say is that I just want to stress again, I think everybody's echoed it, cost recovery and liability. The 400,000 probably is a number that we need to shoot for a little higher. So we probably want to do a little better there. And so those are kind of some of the thoughts to close up. And I concur with, I don't know if we need a motion or do we want to just direct staff to go back and give it another couple months before we come back again?
Yeah, this is what I've heard. I've heard, I think, pretty clearly that we'd like you to take the direction and come back with a more refined product. A lot of the work that you've done is excellent, and so that doesn't change. But the big points that I think I've heard from pretty much the entire table, and somebody can tell me I'm wrong, we take a vote, but the direction would be to look at an RFP process as opposed to a first come, first serve, to look at less vendors than 4, to look at areas, and I think that's the stakeholder discussion where, and I said 4th Avenue, but it then reminded me that there's concerns at Main Gate, and I think there's also some concerns downtown. Oh, that's a closer discussion. So to give us more on geofencing, to look at the amount, I didn't hear anybody say that 2,000 was too little. In fact, I think most people thought it was too much. The tying to the transit stops and getting a map is really an excellent idea. Let us know, as opposed to going into already congested areas, where we can take this program. We'll really coordinate with some of the other transportation things we're doing. And then something more with specific parking plans. And I think I heard pretty clearly, I don't think we're San Francisco. When somebody comes to me and wants San Francisco wages, I kind of tell them you're not in San Francisco. I think you'd say the same for San Francisco costs. But I think we have cut it really close on what these costs are going to be, and we may want to look at increasing those somewhat, particularly if there's somebody like DTP that might come along that covers some stuff. I did want to point out absolutely gratuitously that in reviewing the materials, I learned a few new terms of art like parklets and streeteries, as in scooters shall not be left in parklets or streeteries. And I always appreciate an opportunity to add to my vocabulary. And you never know really when streetery might come up in a conversation. So, but so if that's if Mr. Manager, if you think that's the way to go, I don't know that we need more unless somebody. And by the way, you can come back with it as quickly as you think. I don't want to wait on this thing forever. I mean, if it's a month.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I don't know that 2 weeks would be enough time, but I think we can bring it back in a month. So I'll shoot for the first week of February, or the first meeting in February. If we run into some snag, we'll let you know, and we may delay it a bit, but the plan is to bring it back as quickly as we can.
Does that fit into your time?
Okay.
I just want to say that's fine, but those are, Jonathan listed off the concerns that I've got. It's ironic that we're using the U of A to help with our data analysis, and that's the area where they're illegal. That irony isn't missed. They're not illegal. I mean, they're not legal everywhere. We wouldn't be the odd man out on this thing. If we say no in Tucson, then we would say no in Tucson for some good reasons, in my opinion. We're asking a smaller fee for a greater number of scooters in San Francisco. So that, I'm saying these aren't mom and pop operations. We know that. So we're not going to be breaking any bank if we say we want to make sure that this is going to be cost plus for the city of Tucson. But those issues about parking and safety and where they're allowed in the congested areas, all that stuff that we've talked about are really key. And if they wind up down in outside of the frequent transit network, that's where they might make the most sense, not in the core where it's already congested. And that way we are expanding our transit options.
Okay. Everybody got that? We're good. All right, thank you. And thank you. And as always, you do a really good job. Diana, welcome to the city of Tucson. So far, I think everything we've seen from you is Min Ortega got lucky, I don't know. And so anyways, thank you for being here. Exactly, blind squirrels. Okay. All right, so item 6 is state and national legislative updates. Mr. Greenhill, report to us on what's going on in the other world.
Actually, Honorable Mayor, members of the council, as a segue from the previous item, just want to let you know that the League of Cities has been approached by the industry to talk about a possible bill at the legislature. Their intent, they say, is just definitional. In other words, getting e-scooters into state legislation, being recognized by state legislation. Tucson and other cities have been talking with them about making sure that there's no preemption in anything that might be brought up at the state legislature. We've looked at some language. I've been working with Andy, with Roy Lusk and others and city staff to review language, and we'll be following up on that. And obviously, if there's any bill, I'll be bringing that to Mayor and Council. Turning to some questions from the Vice Mayor about state and federal legislation. Today is day 18 of the federal shutdown. There's an intention by the President to address the nation tonight from the Oval Office. Congressional leaders, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, are expected to respond to that address tonight. There have been some proposals, but there's no agreement yet on opening up the government. In terms of impacts on Tucson, I've been in touch with our Housing and Community Development Department. They report that they have housing assistance funding through January. They feel pretty confident they'll get their February amounts. There are some things that are being held up, environmental reviews that are required to release some grant funds, some questions that they have that they'd prefer to be able to talk to HUD staff about, and there's no one on the other side of the phone. So there are some impacts to city staff. In addition, SNAP and child nutrition programs are still available, and any members of the public that are here or listening, please know that those are still available. On the other hand, national parks are mostly shut down, although the governor has announced that state funding will ensure that the Grand Canyon National Park stays open. Many other parks, though, have been forced to close because of their inability to maintain and protect those parks. Another question from the Vice Mayor had to do with our new delegation and their committee assignments. Senator Sinema has been assigned to the following committees: Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, Commerce, Science and Transportation, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, Veterans Affairs, and the Select Committee on Aging. Senator McSally has been assigned to the following: Armed Services, Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Energy and Natural Resources, which is important on water issues, Indian Affairs, and the Select Committee on Aging. The House committees have not been finalized yet. When they are, we'll share that with Mayor and Council. Of course, as you know, Representative Grijalva will be the chair of the House Committee on Natural Resources. I've sent everybody the link to that committee, and there's a fine picture of Representative Grijalva on the homepage, so I think it's official. And it's great for Tucson, by the way. Some questions about postal reform. As you know, that the President's task force released their recommendations. I can tell you that Representative Elijah Cummings of Maryland, who will be the chair of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, has said he will take up postal reform, and perhaps as soon as this month. It's unlikely that the President's committee's recommendations will be the blueprint for the postal reform effort. That is good. And again, we continue to work with his staff, with our own congressional delegation, and others to make sure that Tucson's priorities, as I've enumerated in the past, are listened to and hopefully incorporated into any reform legislation. There is a proposed increase in forever stamps. The Postal Service is proposing to raise the cost of those forever stamps from 50 cents to 55 cents, a 10% increase. Of course, this will help them with their operating expenses and benefits. They reported a financial loss this year, and the hope is that the new revenues will help them be right-sized. There's another question about the state delegation. So on Monday, well, first off, yesterday, the governor and the state officers were inaugurated into office. It was a good event. Katie Hobbs is Secretary of State. Senator Yee, Kimberly Yee is the state treasurer, and Kathy Hoffman as the state superintendent of schools. So that was yesterday. Next Monday is the State of the State address, where the legislature will kick off the 54th Arizona state legislative session. The vice mayor asked about the breakdown in each House and Senate and the names of leadership. There are 31 Republicans and 29 Democrats in the House. There will be 17 Republicans and 13 Democrats in the Senate. I've listed in my report the names of the leadership teams in both the House and the Senate, both on the Republican and Democratic side. Just to note some local folks that are part of those legislative teams. In the House, the majority whip is Becky Nutt, who's a representative from District 14. That takes in Rita Ranch and some parts of Tucson's southeast side. And then on the Democratic team, the leader is Charlene Fernandez. Most of her district, she's District 4, most of it is in Yuma, although it does extend across the southern part of the state into the Midvale Park area in Tucson. There's also in the House Assistant Minority Leader Randy Freeze from District 9. He served in that same position last year. And then in the Senate, we have David Bradley, who is the Minority Leader of the Democrats in the Senate. He's from District 10. And then Lisa Atondo, also from District 4, that Yuma district that extends into Midvale Park. She's one of the minority co-whips in the Senate. We look forward to working with them this session, and as has been past practice, I will be bringing bills to Mayor and Council as they get dropped, and those should start next Monday. So at your next Mayor and Council meeting, I'll be bringing bills for your consideration. And then finally, the Vice Mayor just wanted to make sure we listed what programs are there to help federal employees in Tucson who are affected by the government shutdown. First, we'd want to make sure that different states actually pursue this a little differently for unemployment benefits. In certain cases, federal workers who are furloughed are eligible for unemployment benefits, and I've sent you the information on how you can direct citizens to look into that. There's also banks and credit union assisted. Some are announcing that they're willing to work with federal employees, and I've sent you information on that. The administration has mentioned that they are announcing their hope that creditors, landlords, etc., will work with people who are in short-term difficult circumstances. There is a link to sample letters that are being made available that perhaps affected employees could use. And then lastly, of course, the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona continues to provide food assistance for any citizens who need it. That's my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have anything else for Andrew? All right, thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll move on to item 7, which is the discussion of the regular agenda. Does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda item this evening? I wouldn't think so. So let's move on to item 8. Does anyone have any items for future agendas at this time? If not, we will adjourn study session and come back at 5:30. Thank you.